You take one more step toward that bike. Rebecca said, her voice low and shaking, but her eyes absolutely still. And I swear to God, I will break every bone in your hand. She was bleeding. Her forearm was already slick with it. The tire iron trembled in her grip, not from weakness, but from the kind of rage that only comes when a woman has nothing left to lose. The thief laughed at her. That was his first mistake. If this story moves you, subscribe, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this goes. The graveyard shift had a way of stripping everything down to the truth. No makeup could survive 4 hours under fluorescent lights and grease smoke. No smile stayed natural past midnight when your feet were screaming and the tips had dried up before 10. And no amount of positive thinking could drown out the sound of your 6-year-old struggling to breathe in the back room, his little chest working twice as hard as it should, just to do what breathing was supposed to do automatically. That was Rebecca Lawson's life at 2:15 in the morning. Every morning, 5 nights a week at Sam's All-Night Diner on the eastern outskirts of Bakersfield, California. She was 28 years old and she looked every year of it. Not in a way that was unkind. People who saw her would say she was pretty blonde hair, pulled back tight cheekbones that caught the light. But there was something behind her eyes that belonged to a woman twice her age. A kind of permanent calculation. Always adding up what she had, always coming up short, always figuring out the next move before the current one had finished playing out. The diner itself was the kind of place that had been described as a landmark for so long that people had stopped noticing how close it was to falling apart. The vinyl on the counter stools was cracked in patterns that looked almost deliberate, like somebody's art project. The neon outside Sam's all night with the apostrophe burned out and the G flickering every 20 seconds through a reddish-orange pulse across the parking lot that made everything look slightly criminal. The coffee was terrible and people kept coming back for it. Sam himself hadn't been in for 3 years. Rebecca ran the place. She ran it because she had to. Leo needed his medication. Leo needed his nebulizer treatments. Leo needed a pulmonologist in Fresno who charged $240 per appointment before insurance, and Rebecca's insurance had a deductible she hadn't even gotten close to meeting. Leo needed things that cost money she didn't have, and the only way to get money she didn't have was to work hours that no one else wanted. So she worked the hours no one else wanted. She had set up a cot fart for him in the manager's office. Technically, Sam had an office, but Sam had also stopped showing up, so the office had become Leo's room between 11 at night and 6 in the morning. She put his favorite blanket in there, the one with the dinosaurs on it, that was too small for him now, but that he refused to give up. She'd plugged his nebulizer into the only outlet that worked reliably. She'd taped a handwritten note to the door that said, "Sleeping, please knock quietly," even though there was almost never anyone to read it. Almost never. Rebecca had just refilled the napkin dispensers, a job she'd been putting off for 2 nights, because the napkin dispensers felt like the least important thing in the world when she heard it. It started as a vibration. The kind you felt in your sternum before you heard it with your ears. A deep rolling thunder that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and then resolved itself as it got closer into something mechanical and deliberate. An engine. Not just any engine. She'd grown up around bikes. Her father had ridden nothing like what was coming, just a beat-up old Sportster that he'd bought used and spent more time working on than riding. But she knew the sound. She knew the difference between a bike that was running and a bike that was performing. And what was coming across the parking lot of Sam's All-Night Diner at 2:15 in the morning was absolutely performing. The Harley-Davidson came into the orange wash of the neon and seemed to absorb it. The chrome caught every photon available and threw it back doubled. It was a big machine, older she could tell from the lines of it, the kind of curves that modern bikes had given up in favor of angles, and it moved with the confidence of something that had survived long enough to stop worrying. The man riding it was built like the bike itself, large, deliberate, taking up exactly as much space as he needed and not 1 inch less. He rolled to a stop in the parking lot directly in front of the diner's big front windows, and for a moment he just sat there with the engine running like he was giving the world a chance to adjust. Then the engine cut. The sudden silence felt physical, like a door slamming. Rebecca watched him dismount. Even doing that, just swinging his leg over and stepping off, he moved with a certain economy. Nothing wasted. He was wearing the leather vest over a dark t-shirt, and she could see the patch on the back before he turned around. The Death's Head, the name of the club, the California chapter. She'd heard the name her whole life. Everybody in California had. She took a breath and went back to the napkin dispensers. He's a customer, she told herself. He's a person who wants coffee or food or both. That's it. That's all this is. The bell above the door rang when he pushed it open. He was even bigger inside. Not in a way that was threatening exactly, or not only in a way that was threatening. There was just a lot of him. He had to be 6'3", maybe 6'4", with shoulders that had clearly been built by something harder than a gym. His arms were tattooed from wrist to wherever his shirt sleeves ended, which was hard to tell because the sleeves were short. His hair was dark and shot through with silver, pulled back. He had a beard that had been around long enough to develop its own personality. His eyes, she caught them when he scanned the room, which he did immediately and methodically, the way certain kinds of men always did, when they walked into a space where a pale gray-green that didn't match the rest of him. He scanned the empty diner, the two guys in the far corner nursing their third refills of decaf, the rotating pie display, the counter. Her. He walked to the counter and sat down on the end stool, his back not quite to the wall, but angled so that he could see the door. Rebecca finished with the napkin dispensers and walked over. Coffee, she said. Black, he said. And whatever's hot. Chili's hot. Eggs are always available. I can do a patty melt if you've got 10 minutes. Chili's fine. She poured his coffee. He wrapped his hands around the mug. His hands were enormous, the knuckles scarred in patterns she recognized as the kind that came from hitting things rather than from accidents. And he stared into it for a moment, like it contained something worth looking at. Long ride, she said. She didn't know why she said it. She didn't usually make conversation at 2 a.m. Conservation of energy. But something about him made the silence feel like it needed filling. He looked up at her. Long enough? Where from, Fresno? She almost said, I know Fresno, because she did, because of the pulmonologist, because she'd driven that highway more times than she wanted to count, with Leo bundled into the passenger seat and his nebulizer packed in the back with the rest of the things she'd learned to travel with. But she didn't say it. She just nodded and went to get his chili. His name, she would learn this later, was David Henderson. David to his mother, who still lived in Modesto and still called on his birthday. Rooster to everyone else, a nickname that had attached itself to him sometime in his 20s for reasons that different people told different ways depending on how well they knew him. He'd been a Hell's Angel for 19 years. He'd done 2 stretches, both of them on the shorter end, both of them for things he'd done and didn't apologize for. He was 44 years old, and he had a daughter in Sacramento who was 11 and who he called every Sunday morning without fail. None of that was visible sitting there at the counter of Sam's all-night diner. What was visible was a large, quiet, watchful man eating chili and drinking coffee at 2:15 in the morning, and a woman who was tired enough to feel everything with twice the normal intensity handing him crackers from a basket. You run this place alone, he asked. This time of night, yeah. No backup. I've got a phone, she said, and a very heavy tire iron under the counter. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, an acknowledgement. Practical, he said. I try, she said. She went to check on the decaf guys. They were getting ready to leave, sliding out of the booth with the particular deliberate slowness of people who had nowhere to be in the morning and knew it. She cleared their cups, took their cash. They tipped $3 on a $14 check, which was better than some nights, and waved them out. Now it was just her and the man at the counter. She restocked the sugar packets. She started a fresh pot of coffee, even though there was no immediate reason to. She checked the clock, 2:22. She thought about Leo. She thought about the rent. She thought about the letter that had arrived 4 days ago from the property management company, the one she'd read 3 times and then folded into a very small square and put in the bottom of her purse, as if making it physically smaller would reduce what it represented. 60 days. That was what the letter said. If she couldn't bring the balance current within 60 days, proceedings would begin. She had $437 in her checking account. The rent was $1,100. She owed 2 months. She breathed through it. She was good at breathing through things. She'd had a lot of practice. You okay? She looked up. He was watching her, not with any kind of predatory attention, with something that was almost careful, measured. Fine, she said automatically. You don't look fine, he said. Not unkindly, just factually. I look tired, she said. There's a difference. Is there? She met his eyes for a second longer than was strictly professional and then looked away. More coffee? He pushed his mug forward. She poured. She was refilling the mug and thinking about whether she could pick up a second shift on Saturday when she heard it from the back, a sound that was so woven into her awareness that she responded to it before she consciously registered it. A small wet cough. Then another. Her whole body oriented toward the manager's office like a compass needle. "Excuse me," she said, and she was already moving. She pushed open the office door. Leo was sitting up on the cot, his dinosaur blanket pushed to one side, his eyes open and a little glazed. He was 6 years old, but in the bad moments, he looked much younger. Something unguarded about his face when he was working to breathe. "Hey, Bug," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Let's get your treatment going, okay?" "Mom," his voice was thin. I know, baby. Sit up a little more for me. That's it, right there." She had the nebulizer going in under 90 seconds. She'd done it enough times that her hands knew the steps before her brain finished processing them. She sat on the edge of the cot with him and held the mask in place and rubbed his back while the machine hummed and the medication turned to mist and Leo breathed it in. "Better," she said after a few minutes. He nodded. His eyes were getting heavy again. "Go back to sleep," she said. "I'll check on you in an hour. Promise about the face." She kissed his forehead. She pulled the dinosaur blanket back up. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him settle, making sure the breathing was evening out. It was fine. He was fine. She closed the door softly and went back out to the counter. Rooster hadn't moved. He was looking at his coffee. When she came back, he looked up. She expected a question. Something about the noise about the child, about why there was a kid in the back room of a diner at 2 a.m. People asked. It felt like accusation even when it wasn't meant that way. He didn't ask anything. He just said, "He okay?" "He's okay," she said. "Good," he said. And that was all. She appreciated that more than she could have explained. She was clearing the remnants of his chili. He'd eaten all of it, which she noted with the automatic satisfaction of a person who cooked for strangers and cared more than was strictly rational, whether they enjoyed it when she heard the truck. Not a Harley this time. Something else. A truck engine, older and rougher, the kind of vehicle that runs because it has no choice rather than because it's been cared for. She heard it pull into the parking lot. She heard the doors. She didn't look up immediately. Trucks came and went. That was the nature of a place like this, on a highway like this, at an hour like this. Trucks were the background noise of her working life. She went to put his bowl in the back. She ran hot water over it. She was stacking it in the drying rack when she heard the first voice from outside and something in the pitch of it, low. Fast, the specific velocity of a person who is trying not to be heard while simultaneously not being able to help themselves, made her go still. She turned off the water. She walked back out to the counter. Through the big front windows, under the orange-red pulse of the broken neon, she could see 2 men in the parking lot. They were at the Harley. One of them had bolt cutters. Everything in her went very quiet. She looked at Rooster. He was still at the counter, his back angled, his sight lines directed at the door, but the angle was wrong. He couldn't see the parking lot from where he was sitting. Not clearly, not what was happening on the side of the bike where the 2 men were crouching. She looked back out the window. The man with the bolt cutters was working on something near the rear of the bike. The other one was standing the watch, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his hands moving in and out of his jacket pockets in a rhythm that meant nerves. She looked at Rooster again. He doesn't know, she thought. The tire iron was under the counter right where she told him it was. Her hand found it. It was heavier than she usually remembered it being, or maybe she was noticing the weight more than usual. Cold metal, slightly rough where the chrome had worn through. She'd had it for 3 years. It had come with the diner left behind by some previous version of this place, and she'd kept it because the diner was on a lonely stretch of highway, and because there were nights when the only thing standing between her and whatever was out there was herself. Don't set a voice in her head. This is not your business. Call the police. Get Rooster. Do not walk out that door. She listened to the voice. She was a reasonable person. She was a person who had a child in the back room, and 60 days before the eviction proceedings, and a checking account balance that made her stomach hurt if she looked at it too long. She was not a person who should be walking out into a dark parking lot with a tire iron to stand between 2 strangers and a motorcycle. She listened to the voice. And then she watched the man with the bolt cutters glance up at his partner and grin a grin she could read through the glass from 15 feet away. The particular satisfaction of a person who believes they are getting away with something, and something in her chest locked up hard and made its own decision. She had spent 28 years watching people get away with things. She had watched her landlord raise the rent by $200 the year after Leo was born, while the carpet stayed stained and the heat still took 45 minutes to come on in January because he knew she couldn't afford to move. She had watched the insurance company deny Leo's claim for the good inhaler, the one that worked faster because of a technicality that their own representative couldn't explain clearly. She had watched tips get stiffed and hours get cut, and the check always arrive a little shorter than the math said it should. She was very, very tired of watching people get away with things. She came around the counter. "Hey," Rooster said. She stopped, looked at him. "There are 2 men outside," she said. Her voice was steady. She was slightly surprised by that. "With bolt cutters, working on your bike." The change in him was immediate and total. It wasn't panic. It was something colder and more focused than panic. He was off the stool and moving toward the door before she'd finished the sentence. "Stay inside," he said. "I have a tire iron," she said, moving with him. "I said stay inside." "And I heard you," she said. "I'm staying close to the door." He looked at her for 1/2 of 1 second, and whatever he saw there made him decide that this was a battle he didn't have time to fight. He pushed through the door. She followed him to the threshold, stood in the doorway with the tire iron at her side, the night air hitting her face, and watched what happened next. The 2 men in the parking lot looked up. The one with the bolt cutters froze first. The other one took a step back, then seemed to remember that there were 2 of them and held his ground. They were both younger than she'd expected, mid-20s maybe, with the wiry, used-up look of men who had been making bad decisions long enough that the decisions were starting to show up on their faces. The one who'd been keeping watch had a switchblade. She could see it in his hand, though she wasn't sure when it had appeared. Rooster stepped into the orange light. "Walk away," he said, not loud, almost conversational. The man with the bolt cutters looked at him. Then he looked at the switchblade. Then he seemed to make a calculation that was wrong in ways that would become apparent very quickly. "It's 2 on 1, man," he said. Rooster smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "No," he said, "it really isn't." The one with the switchblade moved first. He came fast and he came direct, the knife angled up, and Rebecca had 1/2 second of pure animal terror in which her brain screamed at her to go back inside. But Leo was inside, and the diner was her world. And she was standing right there with a tire iron and 28 years of accumulated rage, and she was done watching people take what wasn't theirs. She stepped out of the doorway. The bolt cutter man had seen the knife move and used it as cover, swinging wide toward the Harley, thinking correctly that Rooster would track the blade first. He was almost at the bike. His hands were on it. He was almost gone with it, or at least that was the plan. The plan that required no one to be standing directly between him and the street. Rebecca was standing directly between him and the street. "Back up," she said. He laughed at her. "Get out of my way, sweetheart." She swung the tire iron. She aimed for his hand. She hit his forearm. The crack of it was something she would hear in her sleep for weeks afterward. He screamed. She had not expected the scream, had expected resistance, had expected him to swing back, had expected anything except the raw animal sound that came out of him as he grabbed his arm and folded around it. The bolt cutters hit the asphalt. He was on his knees before she'd fully registered that she'd connected. She was staring at him, breathing hard, when the switchblade found her. She didn't see it coming. She felt it, a line of fire across her left forearm, just below the elbow. The kind of pain that arrives a second after the injury and then absolutely makes itself known. She jerked back. The blood came fast. Rebecca. She didn't know how he knew her name. She'd told him. She must have told him. She couldn't remember. Rooster's voice came from somewhere behind her and to the left, and it carried in it a tone she had never heard from a human being before. Not anger exactly, something that was beyond anger. Something flat and absolute and entirely without question. The man with the switchblade turned toward it. That was all she saw before things moved faster than she could track. Later, she would try to reconstruct what happened in the next 45 seconds. She would not be entirely successful. What she would remember the sound. movement that her eyes couldn't quite catch because it was too purposeful and too fast. The switchblade on the asphalt. The man who had held it on the asphalt not moving. The other one still cradling his arm and making sounds she didn't want to hear again. And Rooster, standing between her and all of it, his back to her, the shoulders rising and falling, controlled, deliberate. He turned around. The pale green eyes found her arm. His face did something complicated. Sit down, he said. Sit down. She sat down, on the asphalt, right there into the parking lot in the orange-red light of the broken neon, the tire iron still in her right hand, and blood moving down her left arm at a rate that was starting to concern her. He was beside her in 3 steps. Let me see it, he said. She held out her arm. Her hand was shaking. She hadn't noticed until now. He took her arm with both of his enormous scarred hands gently. She would note later in the way that things that surprised you left marks and looked at the cut. Deep, she managed. Deep enough, he said. You're going to be fine. She looked up at him. He was very close. She could see a small scar at the corner of his jaw. She could see that the gray-green eyes were not cold at all up close. They were just contained. There was a difference. Leo, she said. The boy's okay, he said. I can hear the machine from here. He's okay. She hadn't realized he'd been listening for it. She hadn't realized she'd told him about the machine. She breathed. In and out. The parking lot was very still. Somewhere in the distance, a truck was moving along the highway, its headlights sweeping past without slowing. Nobody else. Just the 2 of them and the damaged men and the bike that was still standing exactly where it had been parked. I didn't think, she said. Not apologizing, just stating it. No, he agreed. The bolt cutters. He was so close to. He was, Rooster said. I couldn't let him. He looked at her for a long moment. Something was moving through his expression that she couldn't name something that had weight to it. No, he said, you couldn't. He took off the flannel shirt he had under the vest. He folded it into a long strip with a focus and efficiency that told her he had done this before, or things like this in places and circumstances she probably didn't want to fully imagine. He wrapped it around her arm, tied it, checked the tension with his thumb. That'll hold until the paramedics get here, he said. I did, he said, when I came through the door. She stared at him. He had been on the phone while she'd been watching the 2 men. He had been on the phone and he had still moved fast enough to get to her. She looked down at the improvised bandage. The flannel was dark gray, which meant the bleeding didn't show as much as it would have otherwise. She thought about that for a second, whether it was an accident or whether he'd learned to choose dark colors for exactly this reason, and decided she didn't want to pursue that line of thinking right now. The 2 men in the parking lot were not going anywhere. One was still on his knees, one was flat. Neither was a current threat. She looked at the Harley. It was untouched. The bolt cutters had been close. She could see the scoring on the lock where they'd started, but they hadn't finished. That bike, she said, it means something to you. He followed her gaze, sat back on his heels. 19 years, he said, which wasn't quite an answer, but was more of one than she'd expected. I figured, she said, bike like that, you take care of it? Yeah. I'm sorry I didn't come out sooner. He looked at her sharply. Don't, he said. I'm not being. You protected my property, he said very clearly, when you had absolutely no reason to. You bled for it. Don't apologize. She opened her mouth and closed it again. From the back of the diner faintly she heard a small voice. Mom. She was on her feet before she decided to stand. I have to go, he said. I'll be right here. She went. Leo was in the doorway of the manager's office when she came in, his dinosaur blanket draped over one shoulder, like a cape, his dark eyes wide. I heard a noise, he said. Everything's okay, she said. She came to him and crouched down in front of him and found that she needed to hold him for a second, just 1 second, just to know where he was. He leaned into her without asking why. 6 years old, and already he understood that sometimes you held on without asking for an explanation. You're hurt, he said. He'd seen the arm. Just a little, she said. It's wrapped up. The paramedics are coming. Are you in trouble? She pulled back and looked at his face. Serious, worried, older than 6 years should be in his eyes. No, baby, she said. I'm not in trouble. She almost believed it. She held him a little longer, listening to his breathing, steady now, the treatment having done its work. Outside, she could hear the first distant keen of a siren getting closer. She could hear the parking lot quiet contained. No new sounds of violence. No screaming. She thought about 60 days. She thought about $437. She thought about the two men in the parking lot and the bolt cutters and the line of fire across her arm and the moment she had stepped out of the doorway. She hadn't thought. That was the truest thing that she could say about it. She had watched someone reach for something that didn't belong to them, something that another person had built a life around, and her body had made a decision that her brain had only confirmed afterward. She wondered if that was bravery or if it was just exhaustion wearing bravery's face. She pressed her lips to the top of Leo's head. The siren was close now. Through the manager's office window, she could see the flicker of red and blue starting to wash across the parking lot, mixing with the orange-red of Sam's broken neon into something that looked at that angle almost like a dawn that was arriving from the wrong direction. "Stay here," she told Leo. "Promise you'll come back." She thought of all the times she had made that promise, every night, every shift, every time she walked out of this diner towards something she didn't fully control. "I always come back," she said. "Don't I?" He thought about it with the seriousness that only 6-year-olds and philosophers truly bring to a question. "Yeah," he said, "you always come back." She stood up. She smoothed the front of her uniform. She checked the bandage on her arm tight, holding the dark gray flannel doing its job. She walked back out to the parking lot. Rooster was exactly where she'd left him. The paramedics were pulling in. The two men on the asphalt hadn't moved. The Harley stood in the parking lot exactly as it had stood when she'd watched it roll in 2 hours ago, the chrome catching everything, giving nothing back. Rooster looked at her when she came out. Then he looked at the arriving paramedics. Then he looked back at her. "You're going to want to let them look at that arm," he said. "I know," she said. And then he said, "We need to talk." She looked at him, the pale green eyes in the orange-red light, the scarred hands, the 19 years. "About what?" she said. "About what happens next," he said. She didn't know what he meant. She would know soon. But standing in that parking lot at 2:47 in the morning, bleeding through a flannel tourniquet, and listening to her son breathe steadily in the back room, all she knew was that something had shifted. Something had changed in the night in the parking lot of Sam's all-night diner. She hadn't let them take the bike, and somehow without quite understanding how that had changed everything. The paramedic's name tag said Torres, and he worked fast, which Rebecca appreciated because the alternative was working slow, and she didn't have time for that. He cut the flannel tourniquet away with a pair of blunt scissors and looked at the wound underneath with the expression of a man who had seen worse before breakfast. "You did this yourself," he said, meaning the improvised rap. "Someone helped," she said. Torres glanced over his shoulder at Rooster, who was standing 10 feet away talking to a sheriff's deputy with the specific economy of a man who had talked to law enforcement enough times to know exactly how much to say and exactly how much to let sit in the air between words. Then Torres looked back at Rebecca's arm. "Clean cut," he said. "You'll need stitches. 5, maybe 6. You want to ride in or drive yourself?" "I can't leave," she said, "ma'am. I have a child in the back. I can't leave the diner unattended." "Can you stitch it here?" Torres looked at her for a moment the way medical professionals looked at people who were making decisions that were technically legal, but medically inadvisable. Then he reached into his kit. "I can close it," he said. "Field dressing. You'll still need to follow up." "I know," she said. "Thank you." He worked. She sat on the tailgate of the ambulance and let him work and kept her eyes on the parking lot. The two men were in the back of a sheriff's unit, now separated, one still cradling his arm against his chest. The deputy talking to Rooster had a notepad out but wasn't writing much. The Harley stood exactly where it had been all night, immovable chrome catching the red and blue of the emergency lights and doing something almost beautiful with it. "Mom." She turned. Leo was in the diner doorway, his dinosaur blanket still around his shoulders, his feet bare on the threshold. "I told you to stay inside," she said. "I heard sirens," he said. "I got scared." She looked at Torres. He was taping the dressing in place. "Almost done," he said. "1 minute, baby," she told Leo. Go put shoes on. Don't come out here in bare feet." He disappeared. She heard the shuffle of him moving back through the diner. Torres finished. She flexed her arm experimentally. It pulled. It hurt. It held. "Keep it dry," Torres said. "Change the dressing tomorrow. If it gets hot or starts to smell, I know, she said. I will. She slid off the tailgate and walked toward Rooster and the deputy. The deputy, young, maybe 25, with the careful body language of someone still figuring out how to hold authority, looked up when she approached. Ms. Lawson, he said, that's me. I've got your statement from the initial call. I just need to confirm a few things. He ran through it efficiently. 2 men bolt cutters, switchblader intervention with the tire iron, the laceration on her arm, Rooster's involvement. She confirmed each point. When he got to the part about her leaving the diner with the tire iron, he paused. You were aware of the potential danger, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes, she said. And you went out anyway. Yes. He wrote something. She couldn't tell what. He thanked her, told her someone would be in touch, and moved back toward his unit. Rooster watched him go. Then he turned to Rebecca. You need to sit down, he said. I'm fine. You've been saying that all night. It keeps being true, she said. But she sat down on the bench outside the diner, the one that had been there as long as the diner had, and that had never been particularly comfortable, because her legs were making a case for it that her pride couldn't fully override. He sat down beside her, not close enough to crowd, just present. You said we needed to talk, she said. Yeah. About what happens next. Yeah. She waited. He wasn't a man who was going to be rushed, and she was tired enough that she didn't have the energy to try. Those men, he said after a moment. You know what they were? Thieves, she said specifically. She looked at him. I don't know their names if that's what you're asking. They weren't random, he said. That truck, that parking lot, they knew what they were coming for. She felt something settle in her chest that was cold and uncomfortable. You're saying they followed you here. I'm saying it's possible. She thought about that, about the timing, 2 a.m, a deserted stretch of highway, a diner with 1 employee and no other customers, about how long they'd sat in that truck before coming in. She hadn't seen them sit. She hadn't seen the truck until they were already at the bike, which meant they'd come in dark without headlights or from a direction she couldn't see from the counter. How long have they been following you? She said. I don't know that they have been, he said. This might have been the first time. Or not, he agreed. She absorbed that. So when you leave, he said, this stops being your problem. Is that true? He met her eyes. He didn't look away. No, he said, probably not completely. She appreciated the honesty so much it almost hurt. They saw my face, she said. The one whose arm I broke. He looked right at me. He did. And they know where I work. They do? She was quiet for a moment. The sheriff's units were pulling out of the parking lot, taking the 2 men with them. Torres and his partner were loading up the ambulance. The parking lot was emptying out, returning to its normal, middle-of-the-night stillness, and somewhere in the gap between the sirens and the silence, she heard the reality of her situation settling in like a stone dropping into water. She worked nights alone. She had a child. The 2 men who'd just been arrested knew her face and her location and whatever came with them. Associates grudges the particular kind of irrational anger that men in their situations sometimes directed at the people who'd caused their problems. None of that disappeared because a deputy's car had driven away with them in the back. I need to make a call, Rooster said. She looked up. To who? He pulled out his phone. My chapter. She stared at him. Why? He looked at her with the patience of a man explaining something he considered obvious. Because what just happened here is going to have consequences, he said. And I'm not leaving until I know those consequences are covered. You don't owe me anything. Ms. Lawson. He said her name very deliberately, the way someone said a name when they wanted to make sure it landed. You walked out of your diner at 2 a.m. with a tire iron to protect my property. You took a blade doing it. I owe you considerably more than a phone call. She opened her mouth, closed it. I'm going to make the call now, he said. He stood and walked a few feet away, and she watched him dial, and then listened to his voice, low controlled, nothing she could fully make out, and thought about what it meant essentially that a Hells Angels chapter president was standing in her parking lot making calls on her behalf at 3 a.m. She didn't know what it meant yet. She had the feeling she was about to find out. Leo came through the diner door with his shoes on the wrong feet, which she noticed, and he didn't, and he sat down beside her on the bench and leaned against her shoulder. Is the man okay? He asked. Which man? The big one. He pointed at Rooster, who was still on the phone with his back to them. He's fine, she said. He's making a call. His jacket is cool, Leo said. It has a picture on it. I know. What does it mean? She looked at the patch on the back of the leather vest, the death's head, the waist, the name. It means he belongs to something, Sheba said, because it was the truest, simple answer she could give. Like how I belong to you, Leo said. Something in her chest moved. Exactly like that, she said. Rooster finished his call. He turned around and she saw his eyes go to Leo with an expression she hadn't expected. Not the practiced blankness he'd used with the deputy, not the cold calculation she'd seen when the switchblade came out. Something more human, more complicated. He walked back over and looked down at Leo with the specific uncertainty of a large man who was not sure how to adjust his scale for a 6-year-old. Hey, he said. Leo looked up at him. No fear. Leo had never had the instinct for fear that adults developed. He took people as they came with the radical acceptance of a child who had met enough strangers in waiting rooms and hospitals to understand that large and intimidating did not always mean dangerous. Hi, Leo said. Did you see my mom hit that guy? Rooster blinked. I did. She's really strong, Leo said. She is, Rooster said. She really is. He looked at Rebecca over Leo's head. Something passed between them that wasn't quite a conversation, but was more than a glance. I need you to do something for me, he said. What? Lock up for the night. She shook her head. I can't. I'm on shift until 6. Is there someone who can come in? At 3 in the morning. Call them, he said. Tell them it's an emergency. Rooster, Rebecca. First name, direct. Those 2 men had associates. I don't know how many. I don't know if they were alone tonight or if someone dropped them and drove away before we ever came out. I don't know what I don't know, and that means I'm not comfortable with you being in this building alone for the next 3 hours. So call someone. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about arguing. She thought about the $437 in the 60 days and the fact that she could not afford to walk away from a shift even for good reasons. She thought about Leo's arm around her waist. She picked up her phone and called Deirdre, who was 53 and had worked the morning shift at Sam's since before Rebecca had started there, and who answered on the 4th ring with the voice of a woman who had been expecting bad news for so long that she'd made a kind of peace with it. I need you, Rebecca said. How bad? Deirdre said. I got cut. I'm okay. I need someone here. A pause. Give me 40 minutes. Thank you, Rebecca said. She hung up, looked at Rooster. 40 minutes, she said. He nodded. Good. He paused. You should know the men tonight. One of them, the one with the blade. I've seen him before. Her breath stilled. Where? Fresno, he said. 6 months ago. Different situation. Same kind of work. He looked at the parking lot at the space where his bike sat. They weren't random targets. They chose that bike specifically, which means somebody sent them. Who? That, he said, is the question I'm going to spend the next few days answering. She absorbed this slowly. The weight of it accumulated the way debt did, not all at once, but in layers, each one heavier than the last. It wasn't a random robbery. It was a directed one, which meant the men in that sheriff's car were not the end of something, but possibly the beginning. Am I in danger? She said. Flat, direct. She needed the truth. He didn't rush to reassure her. She noticed that and was grateful for it. I don't know, he said. I think there's a low probability that anyone who sent those men would care about a diner waitress who happened to get in the way. The target was the bike. The target was me. He paused. But low probability isn't 0. Right, she said, which is why I made the call. She looked at him. What did you tell them? I told them where I was, he said. I told them what happened. I told them I needed a show. A show, she repeated. You'll understand when they get here, he said. She didn't know what to make of that. She filed it in the part of her mind that was still processing the night's events and would need several hours of sleep and possibly a very strong cup of coffee before it could make coherent sense of any of them. Deirdre arrived in 38 minutes, which was 2 minutes ahead of schedule, which was exactly the kind of person Deirdre was. She came through the parking lot with her apron already tied and her reading glasses already on her head and stopped when she saw Rebecca's arm. Lord, she said, it's closed. Rebecca said, I'm fine. You need to go home. I know. Does Sam know about this? Sam doesn't know anything about anything, Rebecca said. He hasn't been in for 3 years. Deirdre looked at Rooster with the expression of a woman who had spent 5 decades encountering unusual situations and had developed a sophisticated taxonomy for sorting them. She placed him in a category, seemed to accept the placement. "You'll make sure she gets home safe," she said to him. Rooster looked mildly surprised to be addressed directly. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Deirdre nodded with the finality of a matter settled, went inside, and within 60 seconds had the coffee going and the counter wiped. Rebecca watched through the window and felt something unclench in her chest that had been knotted for hours. She gathered Leo, who had fallen half asleep against her side on the bench, and gathered his blanket and gathered the small bag she kept in the manager's office with his things, his rescue inhaler, his backup nebulizer medication, the battered paperback. She read to him some nights when sleep was stubborn. She stood in the parking lot with all of it and looked at the night around her and felt suddenly enormously tired. "My car's around back," she said. "I know," Rooster said. "I saw it when I came in." "You noticed my car?" "I noticed things," he said. "Not bragging, just true." She nodded. She looked down at Leo, who was awake enough to walk, but not much more than that, his eyes at half-mast, his sneakers still on the wrong feet. She looked at the Harley. "Will it be okay here?" she said. "Until I come back for it," he said. "Yes." "You're not riding it tonight." "Not with you driving in front of me in the condition you're in," he said. "I'll follow your car." "You don't have to." "Rebecca," he said with the same deliberate patience he'd used before, "I'm going to follow your car. Please let me follow your car." She looked at him. She was too tired to argue, and she admitted to herself too scared. Not of him, of the open road, the unlit stretches between the diner and her apartment, the dark truck that might or might not be parked somewhere she couldn't see it. "Okay," she said. They walked around back. She got Leo into his booster seat with the automatic efficiency of 1,000 repetitions. She started the car. In the rearview mirror, she saw Rooster return to the front of the building. Wait for a moment, she realized he was telling Deirdre something, making sure she had his number. She would learn later and then come around to where his bike was parked. He rolled the Harley around to the back of the building with the engine off, not wanting to wake the highway. Then he started it. Even at low throttle, it was a sound that restructured the air around it. She pulled out of the parking lot. He followed. For the 12 minutes it took to drive from Sam's all-night diner to the Sunridge apartment complex on the eastern edge of Bakersfield's outskirts, Rebecca Lawson drove with both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road and the Harley's single headlight steady in her rearview mirror. Leo slept in the back seat. The road was empty. Nothing came at them out of the dark. But she kept checking the mirror. Not just for Rooster, for anything behind him. Nothing came. She pulled into the parking lot of the Sunridge. The complex was 3 buildings arranged in a loose horseshoe, 2 floors, each exterior walkways with iron railings that had been painted over so many times the texture was starting to disappear. She was in Building B, 2nd floor, Unit 14. She had lived there for 4 years. She knew every crack in the walkway and every neighbor's car and exactly which stair creaked and how to step to avoid it at 3 in the morning when Leo was asleep over her shoulder. She parked. Rooster parked beside her and cut the engine. She got out, opened the back door. Leo stirred. "We home," he mumbled. "We're home," she said. She lifted him. He was getting too big for this, but not quite too big yet, and she was grateful for that particular grace, the ability to carry him for just a little longer. She settled him against her good shoulder, her right one, so the cut-on arm was free. Rooster was standing by her car. "Which floor?" "2nd," she said. "I'm okay. I'll carry him." She looked at him. He was looking at Leo with an expression that was difficult to read and easy to trust, which was a strange combination. But she was operating on fumes and instinct, and her instincts had served her adequately well tonight. "He's shy with strangers," she said. "He's asleep," Rooster said. She almost smiled. She shifted Leo toward him, and Rooster took him with hands that were enormous and careful, settling the boy against his chest like he'd done it before, or like he was the kind of person who understood how to hold something fragile even if he hadn't been asked to in a long time. They went up the stairs. She went first, found her key, opened the door. He carried Leo inside and stood in the middle of her small living room and looked at her waiting. "His room," she said, "down the hall." She led him. He laid Leo in his bed with a care that was almost surgical in its precision, pulling back the blanket, first placing the boy down, pulling the blanket back up. Leo shifted, murmured, settled. They stood in the doorway of his room for a moment. The nightlight was shaped like a moon. It threw everything in a pale silver that made the room feel somehow outside of time. "He's a good kid," Rooster said. "He's everything," she said. And then, because she was too tired for anything other than truth, "He's the only reason I do any of it." Rooster nodded slowly. "I know that," he said. "I have a daughter." She looked at him. "You do 11, he said. "Sacramento." She waited. He didn't say more, and she didn't push. They went back to the living room. She sat down on the couch because there was genuinely nowhere else she could be at that point. And the couch received her like an old argument both sides had quietly agreed to end. "You should sleep," he said. "You should go home," she said. "I will," he said. "Not yet." "Rooster, the call I made earlier," he said. "The chapter." He paused. "They're on their way." She stared at him. "Here. To the diner first," he said, "and then here. They'll do a pass of the neighborhood. Make sure the situation is contained." She sat with that information for a moment. "How many enough?" he said. "Enough for what?" "Enough that anyone watching this building that will see them and make a different set of decisions about whatever they were planning to do next," he said. She absorbed this. She looked at her hands. The right one still had a faint tremble that she couldn't quite steady. The left arm pulled every time she moved it. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said. He sat down in the chair across from her, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "You want the truth?" "I've been operating on truth all night," she said. "Keep going." "What you did tonight," he said, "well, it wasn't smart." "I know. Tactically, strategically, from a self-preservation standpoint, it was the wrong call." "I know that too. But it was the right thing," he said. "And people who do the right thing when it's the wrong call." He stopped, started again. "My daughter's mother did something like that once. Different situation, different stakes. But the same core thing, she stood between someone she cared about and something that was coming for them when the smart move was to step back." He paused. "She's not around anymore." The room went very quiet. Rebecca didn't ask. She could see in his face that he would tell her as much as he was going to tell her, and that this was close to the limit. "I couldn't protect her," he said. "Different time, different me." He looked at his hands. "But when I have the capacity to protect someone who shows that kind of character, I don't walk away from it. That's all this is." Rebecca looked at him for a long time. The man in her living room at 3:40 in the morning, this enormous, scarred, contained person, with the pale green eyes and the dead member's name somewhere in his history, and the 11-year-old daughter in Sacramento, he called every Sunday, and she thought, "You are the last thing I expected tonight, and somehow you are exactly what the night required." "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." "Okay," she said again. "I'm not going to fight you on it." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite relief, something close. They sat in the small living room with the moon nightlight, glow coming faintly from down the hall. And outside in the distance, she heard it before she could identify it, a sound like thunder rolling in from the west building and multiplying until it was no longer one sound, but 30, a unified roar that swelled and then steadied as it got closer, as it entered the street, as it circled the Sunridge apartment complex in a slow, deliberate, utterly unmistakable pass. 30 Harleys, exhaust and chrome, and the kind of presence that rearranged the air around it. She was standing at her window without knowing she'd stood up. They came in formation, unhurried, filling the street from one curb to the other. Headlights sweeping the building, faces the parking lots, the shadows between the cars. Not aggressive, not threatening, at least not to anyone inside who was meant to feel protected. Leo appeared at the hallway entrance, rubbing his eyes, his moon nightlight shadow stretching out behind him. "Mom," he said, "what's that sound?" She looked at Rooster. He was watching her from the chair, watching her watch the bikes move through her street. "That," she said to Leo, and her voice was steadier than she expected, "is some people making sure we're safe." Leo padded to the window and stood beside her, his shoulder against her hip, and looked out at the procession of headlights moving through the dark. "Are they our friends?" he asked. She kept her eyes on the street, on the 30 lights moving in unison, on what they meant and what they cost and what it said about a world that was stranger and more layered than she'd let herself believe in the long, grinding months of just surviving. She put her hand on Leo's shoulder. "Yeah, baby," she said. "I think they might be." Outside, the last of the bikes completed its circuit. The sound began to recede, fading back toward the highway, but it didn't disappear entirely. She could hear if she listened that several of them had stopped, parked, settled into the kind of stillnesses that was not absence but presence. They were staying. She hadn't asked for this. She had known to ask for this. She had walked out of a diner with a tire iron because she couldn't watch someone take something that wasn't theirs. And this, the 30 bikes in the protected street, and the man in her living room chair with his hands folded and his eyes steady, this was what had walked back in with her. She didn't know yet what the next 60 days would look like. She didn't know yet what was coming or what Rooster's phone calls had set in motion or what daylight would reveal when it finally arrived. But for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, the feeling in her chest was not the cold arithmetic of debt and desperation. It was something else entirely. Something that felt cautiously and against her better judgment, like the first breath after a long time underwater. She slept 4 hours, maybe 4.5. She knew this because she had looked at the clock when she finally lay down, 4:17 a.m., and when Leo's coughing woke her at 8:44, the math was right there waiting for her, simple and merciless. She did his morning treatment before she did anything else. Before coffee, before checking her phone, before allowing herself to think about the bandage on her arm, or the man who might or might not still be in her living room, or the 30 motorcycles that had circled her building in the dark, like something out of a story she hadn't known she was living. Leo first. Always Leo first. She sat on the edge of his bed and held the nebulizer mask in place and rubbed his back in slow circles while the machine hummed, and he looked at her with his dark eyes still soft from sleep and said, "Your arm has a bandage." "It does," she said. "Does it hurt?" "A little." "More than a little." She looked at him. 6 years old, and already he could read her the way other people couldn't. "Some," she said. "Not bad." He seemed to accept this. He breathed his medicine in. When the machine finished, he sat up straighter the way he always did when the tightness released like a fist unclenching. "Is the big man still here?" he asked. She didn't know the answer to that. She found out 30 seconds later when she walked into the living room and saw Rooster asleep in the chair. His arms crossed, his head tilted just slightly to the left, the leather vest still on the boots, still on his feet. He had not moved to the couch. He had stayed in the chair all night, positioned with his sightline to the front door, and even in sleep there was something watchful about him. Something that did not fully release. She stood in the entrance to the hallway and looked at him for a moment. Then she went to make coffee. The coffee maker was old and took longer than it should have, and grumbled through the whole process like it resented being asked. She listened to it and looked out the window above the sink. The street below was quiet in the morning light. 2 of the bikes were still parked at the far end of the lot. Not 30, just 2. Sentinels. She poured 2 cups when it finished. She carried them to the living room. She set one on the table beside Rooster's chair. The smell woke him. She watched it happen, the slight shift in his breathing, the return of tension to his shoulders, the eyes opening, already alert, already scanning. He'd been asleep for maybe 4 hours at the outside, and he woke up like a man who had learned a long time ago that the space between sleeping and ready needed to be as small as possible. He looked at the coffee. He looked at her. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he said. His voice was rough with sleep in a way that made him sound briefly like an ordinary person. He picked up the cup, drank, set it back down. "Your bikes are still outside," she said. "2 of them," he said. "Prospect and one of my officers. They'll stay through the day." "You told them to do that?" "Yes." She sat down on the couch with her own cup. The morning had a quality to it that felt provisional, like it hadn't fully committed to being real yet. She looked at the bandage on her arm. In daylight, it looked more serious than it had felt in the dark, which was usually how injuries worked. "I need to call my landlord today," she said. He looked at her. "I have 60 days, she said. "Or I had 60 days as of 4 days ago, which means 56 days now." She said it evenly, the way she said most things that frightened her, as fact rather than catastrophe, because naming it calmly was the only way she'd found to keep it from eating her alive. 2 months behind on rent. "I've been picking up extra shifts, but the math hasn't been working." "How much?" he said. She looked at him. "I'm not telling you that, Rebecca. I'm not," she said. "That's not why I'm telling you. I'm telling you because It's the truth of my situation, and after last night I think you have earned the truth of my situation, but I'm not telling you so that you'll fix it. He studied her. His expression was not impatient. It was something more complicated than impatient, a kind of careful respect that she hadn't expected, and that landed harder than almost anything else he'd done. Okay, he said, okay. You set the terms, he said. I'll respect them. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at her coffee. That might be the most useful thing anyone has said to me in a year, she said. Leo came in from the hallway dressed, both shoes on the correct feet this time, which she noted with the small internal relief of a parent who had once spent 20 minutes at a doctor's office before noticing her child had been wearing his sneakers backward since breakfast. He stopped when he saw Rooster awake. Hi, he said. Hey, Rooster said. You slept in our chair. I did. Leo considered this with the forensic interest of a child encountering a new data point. Was it comfortable? Not particularly, Rooster said. Our couch is better, Leo said. You should have used the couch. I'll remember that, Rooster said. Leo went to the kitchen with the directness of a person who had decided the conversation was complete and breakfast was more pressing. Rebecca heard the cabinet open, heard the cereal box, heard the splash of milk. She looked at Rooster. He was watching the kitchen doorway with that same expression he'd had in Leo's room the night before, complicated, quiet, angled in a way that made her think of things held at a careful distance. Tell me about your daughter, she said. He looked at her. Why, because you told me she exists and then stopped, she said, and because you slept in my chair all night and you're drinking my coffee, and I think that earns me a sentence or two. He was quiet for a moment. Then, was? Her name is Maya. She's in 5th grade. She's better at math than I ever was. A pause. She lives with her grandmother, her mother's mother. Another pause. Her mother passed 4 years ago. Rebecca didn't offer condolences. She could see he didn't want them. Does Maya know what you do? She said. She knows what I am, he said. She doesn't know all of what I've done. Is that a distinction that holds up? He looked at her sharply. Then slowly he nodded. Not always, he said. No, she agreed. This was the shape of their first real conversation. Not the exchanges at the diner counter, not the crisis management of the parking lot, but this two people in the early morning with their coffee cups and their histories finding out what the other one was made of when the emergency had passed and ordinary light had come in through the windows. She was in the middle of deciding what to say next when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, Bakersfield area code. She answered. Ms. Lawson, Twain, a man's voice. Flat professional, the specific kind of flat that either meant law enforcement or someone who had spent enough time around law enforcement to pick up the vocal patterns. This is Detective Harlan Briggs, Kern County Sheriff's Department. I'm following up on the incident at Sam's Diner last night. Yes, she said. Would it be possible for you to come in this morning? We have some additional questions regarding the 2 individuals taken into custody. She looked at Rooster. He was watching her. He'd heard enough. Can you tell me what kind of questions? She said. Background on the incident, Briggs said, and some information that's come up that we'd like to discuss with you directly. Information that had come up. She noted the phrasing. Deliberately uninformative phrasing. I can come in at 11, she said. That works. Ask for me at the front desk, Detective Briggs. He hung up. She lowered the phone. Sheriff's Department, Rooster said. It wasn't a question. Detective, she said. He said information has come up. Something moved through Rooster's expression. Fast, controlled, gone before she could fully read it. I'll take you, he said. You don't have to. Those 2 men, he said. If there's information that's come up, it involves me as much as it involves you. Possibly more. She thought about that. He wasn't wrong. The bike had been his. The men had been sent possibly by someone connected to him. Whatever the detective wanted to discuss was almost certainly not limited to the cut on her arm. All right, she said, but you're not coming in with me. I know that, he said, without offense. He understood how rooms he walked into changed. Leo needs to go to Deirdre's, she said, already calculating. Deirdre watches him sometimes when I have appointments. I'll call her. Do it, he said. I'll wait. The next 2 hours moved with the particular compressed efficiency of a morning that has too many pieces that need to be in the right places by a specific time. She called Deirdre, who said yes immediately, which was one of Deirdre's defining qualities. She said yes immediately, and she meant it every time. She got Leo ready, explained that she had an appointment, did not explain the nature of the appointment, because 6-year-olds absorbed everything and processed it at 2 in the morning when you least needed it. She changed the dressing on her arm, which hurt considerably more in daylight than it had hurt when she'd first looked at it, and took 2 ibuprofen and decided that was all the acknowledgement the pain was going to get. She dropped Leo at Deirdre's. When she came back out to her car, Rooster was leaning against his bike, the morning sun doing things to the chrome that she noticed despite herself. "Ready?" he said. "No," she said honestly. "Let's go anyway." He followed her to the sheriff's station. Detective Harlan Briggs was 50 compact with the face of a man who had spent a career being unimpressed and had gotten very good at it. He had a handshake that was exactly firm enough and a way of looking at her that sorted her into a category she couldn't quite identify. Not suspect, not victim, something in between. He sat her down in a room that was not the room you sat in. If you were in serious trouble, she knew that much from years of having a father who'd had conversations with people in rooms just an ordinary meeting room with a table and chairs and a window that had blinds someone had clearly stopped adjusting a long time ago. "Ms. Lawson," he said, "thank you for coming in." "Of course," she said. "How's the arm?" "Closed," she said. "I'll follow up with a doctor." He nodded. He put a folder on the table. He did not open it immediately. "The 2 men from last night," he said, "Marcus Tolley and Devin Price. Do those names mean anything to you?" "No," she said. "You'd never seen them before last night." "Never." He nodded again. "Tolley's the one with the broken arm. You did that?" "Yes." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite approval, an acknowledgement. "He's going to need surgery," he said. "Einschäden. 2 fractures, the radius and something in the wrist." She absorbed this. She had not known until this moment how she would feel about knowing. She found that she felt not guilt exactly, something more complicated. The certainty that she had done what she had to do, sitting uncomfortably alongside the image of a man in a surgical suite because of her. "The switchblade," she said. "Devin Price. Yes, he'll face assault charges in addition to the theft and breaking and entering. Tolley is cooperating." She looked at him. "Already, Tolley's arm hurts," Briggs said simply. "And Tolley is not what you'd call a person with deep reserves of loyalty." He opened the folder. "He says they were hired, paid cash, given a target, specifically the 1947 Harley-Davidson belonging to one David Henderson, known as Rooster Chapter Officer, Hells Angels, California." He looked up at her. "Were you aware of Mr. Henderson's affiliation at the time of the incident?" "Yes," she said. "The patch was visible." "And that didn't give you pause?" "I'm not sure what my pausing would have accomplished," she said. "He was a customer. Someone was stealing from him." Briggs looked at her for a moment with an expression that was almost warm. "Tolley says you hit him before Henderson even came outside." "That's correct?" "You were alone. I had a tire iron." He wrote something. "Who hired Tolley and Price?" she said. He looked up. "That's the question we're working on," he said. "Tolley claims he never met the person directly. Contact through a third party, cash left in a specific location." He paused. "But the specific bike, the level of detail about Henderson's route, the timing. Whoever put this together had access to information about his movements." "Someone in his organization," she said. Briggs said nothing, which was, she understood, a kind of answer. She sat back in her chair. The implications assembled themselves without her permission, one connecting to the next in a chain she did not entirely want to follow to its end. Rooster had said the night before that the men weren't random. He'd said he was going to spend the next few days finding out who sent them. He hadn't said what he would do once he found out. She didn't ask Briggs what the detective thought would happen. She was fairly certain Briggs had his own set of predictions about that, and she was equally certain that most of those predictions would not appear in any report she would be asked to sign. "Is there anything you need from Maj?" he said. "We may need you to testify," he said. "If this goes to trial, which depends on how cooperative Tolley continues to be." "I understand. And Ms. Lawson?" He closed the folder. His manner shifted slightly, not unprofessional, but more direct, personal. "Henderson, you said he was a customer. Has he made any contact with you since the incident beyond what occurred at the scene?" She looked at him. She thought about the chair in her living room, the 30 bikes circling her building, the coffee cup she'd left on the end table. "He made sure I got home safely," she said. "Given the circumstances, I thought that was reasonable." Briggs studied her. He's not a safe person to be connected to Ms. Lawson. I'm aware of his background, she said. Are you? I'm aware he's not a civilian, she said. I'm also aware that he stayed in my parking lot until the paramedics arrived, personally ensured my son was safe, and made sure I wasn't alone on a dark highway at 3 in the morning after two men tried to rob and assault me. She paused. I'm not naive detective, but I'm also not going to pretend that the only thing that matters about a person is the worst version of their history. Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, and she stood, and he extended his hand again. You're going to be fine, Ms. Lawson, he said. Not the reflex reassurance of a person managing a witness, something more considered. I know, she said, and this time she believed it a little more than she had the night before. Rooster was waiting outside, not on the bike, standing beside it, arms folded, watching the entrance. He saw her come out, and something in his posture released. Well, he said, they were hired, she said. Talia's talking. Someone with inside knowledge of your route gave them the target. His jaw tightened. Barely. Enough. I need to make some calls, he said. I know, she said. Rebecca. He stopped. Started again. He did this, started sentences and recalibrated them, finding the precise version of what he meant. What I'm going to do about this, about whoever is behind it, that's going to happen through channels that have nothing to do with the sheriff's department and nothing to do with you. I understand that, she said. I want you to understand it clearly, he said, because what comes next for that person, I can't make you comfortable with it, and I'm not going to try. She looked at him in the morning light. She thought about what she'd said to Briggs, that the worst version of a person's history wasn't the only thing that mattered. She believed that. She also believed that people could hold more than one truth at once, and the truth she was holding right now was that she didn't want to know the details of what Rooster was going to do, because knowing would put her in a position she couldn't navigate cleanly, and she had a child and a diner, and 56 days before eviction proceedings, and she needed to be able to navigate cleanly. Do what you need to do, she said. I trust your judgment about what that is. He stared at her. You trust my judgment. You showed me your judgment last night, she said, more than once. He didn't respond immediately. She could see him processing it, the particular difficulty of a person who had not been trusted by most people for most of his adult life, being told plainly that he was trusted now. All right, he said quietly. They drove back to the Sunridge separately. She stopped for gas. She called Deirdre and told her she'd pick Leo up by noon. She sat in the gas station parking lot for 2 minutes with the car idling and let herself feel the full weight of the last 12 hours because she'd been deflecting it since 2:15 a.m. And deflection had a carrying capacity, and she was at the edge of it. 2 men in a parking lot, her arm, Leo's face when he'd seen the bandage, the 30 bikes in her street, Rooster in her chair, the detective across the table. She had walked out of that diner with a tire iron, and she had fundamentally altered the trajectory of her life, and she didn't know yet if that was terrifying or miraculous. She suspected it was both. She suspected that most things worth doing were. She pulled back into traffic. When she got home, Rooster was already there, sitting on the steps of Building B, his phone in his hand. He looked up when she parked. I spoke to my VP, he said when she reached the steps. And on his horn, and we know who commissioned it, he said. It wasn't external, it was internal. She stopped. Someone in your club. Former member, he said. His voice was even, too even. The particular flatness of someone compressing something very hot into a very small space. He was removed from the chapter 8 months ago. He's had grievances, about the bike specifically. He believed it should have come to him when the previous owner passed. The previous owner was a friend of yours, she said, not a question. She could hear it. 31 years, he said, and you inherited the bike. He left it to me. Rooster said, in writing, witnessed, clear. He paused. That didn't matter to Denny. Denny, a name for the shape of it now. A specific human being who had decided that the loss of what he felt owed was worth sending 2 men with bolo cutters to a diner in the middle of the night. What happens to Denny, she said. He met her eyes. What needs to happen, he said. She nodded. She didn't ask again. Rebecca. He stood up. Something was shifting in his manner, the operational efficiency of the last 12 hours giving way to something less structured, more personal. I owe you a different kind of conversation. Not logistics, not security. You don't owe me. I do, he said. Let me. She waited. I told you about Maya's mother, he said. What I didn't tell you is that the situation she walked into, the one she stood between, and the people she was protecting, it was because of me, my life, my associations. She was collateral to my world. He paused. You were collateral to my world last night. You didn't volunteer for it. It came to you because of where you were and who I am. I made my own choices, she said. You did, he said, and they were extraordinary choices, but they were choices you shouldn't have had to make. He stopped. I am telling you this because you should know that I understand what last night cost you. Not just the arm, the fear, the risk, the fact that your son was 30 feet away. She felt something crack open in her chest at the word son. Just slightly, just enough to let in the part of the night she'd been holding at arm's length, the image of herself with the tire iron in her hand and Leo's cot through the diner wall, and how close those two things had been. Her eyes stung. She didn't let them do more than sting. I'd do it again, she said. I know, he said. That's exactly the problem. She almost laughed. The sound that came out of her wasn't quite a laugh, but it wasn't far from one, and it surprised her enough that she put her hand over her mouth. He was looking at her with those pale green eyes and that expression. She'd started to be able to read the careful, measured version of something warmer underneath. I'm going to help you, he said, not because you need help, not because I think you can't handle your own life, but because what happened last night created an obligation that I don't know how to set down, and I wouldn't want to even if I could. Rooster, let me say it, he said. She stopped. The lease, he said, the medical, whatever Leo needs. I'm not doing it as a transaction. I'm not doing it because I feel guilty. I'm doing it because the world should be the place where a woman who stands between two thieves and an old man's memory of his dead friend doesn't come home to an eviction notice. He paused. It isn't that place most of the time, but it can be that place right now for you. She stood on the steps of Building B in the morning sun with the bandage on her arm and her son's doctor's appointment card in her pocket, and the words landing in her chest like something that had been thrown from a very great height and had arrived intact. She had sworn she wasn't going to cry. She had been very firm about it. She looked at the two bikes at the end of the parking lot, at the prospect and the officer who had stayed through the night without being asked twice, who were eating something out of a paper bag and talking quietly, two men standing a watch that no one would see on any official record anywhere. She thought about a world where people did things without official records. She'd always been skeptical of that world. She'd always been on the wrong end of it. She wasn't sure she was on the wrong end anymore. I'm going to get my son, she said, her voice held. She was proud of it for holding. I'll be here, he said. She walked to her car. She got in. She put both hands on the wheel, and then she sat there for a moment in the late morning light and let herself feel fully without deflection, without the arithmetic of survival, running interference what it was to have been seen. Not managed, not assessed, not processed. Seen by the last person she would have predicted, in the last place she would have expected. On a night she would never for the rest of her life be able to fully explain to anyone who hadn't been there. She started the car. She went to get Leo. Leo asked about Rooster on the drive back from Deirdre's. He asked the way 6-year-olds ask things directly without preamble, inserted into the silence between two other thoughts, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Is the big man going to be there when we get home? Rebecca kept her eyes on the road. Probably, she said. Good, Leo said, and then immediately, can we have grilled cheese for lunch? She almost laughed. She didn't quite make it, but she came close, and the almost laugh felt like the first genuinely clean thing she'd experienced since 2:14 a.m. the previous night, 1 minute before the Harley rolled into the parking lot, and the entire structure of her ordinary life developed a crack that was either going to split it apart or let something in. She was still deciding which. Rooster was on the phone when they pulled in, standing by the steps of Building B, and he held up one finger when he saw her, a universal gesture, just a moment, and kept talking. His voice was low and controlled, and she caught the word handled once and decided that was all she needed to catch. Leo got out of the car and went directly to the prospect at the end of the lot. A young man couldn't have been more than 22, with a shaved head and the specific watchful stillness of someone who had recently been given a responsibility. He took seriously and said, "Hi, what's your name?" The prospect looked momentarily uncertain, the way young men looked when addressed directly by children, like the protocol was unclear. "Tommy," he said. "I'm Leo," Leo said. "Do you want grilled cheese? My mom makes really good grilled cheese." Tommy looked at Rebecca. Rebecca looked at Tommy. "You're welcome to come up," she said, because it was the only reasonable response to the situation, and also because she was fairly sure Tommy had been sitting in that parking lot since 3 in the morning on a cold California night, and he had probably not eaten anything more substantial than whatever had been in that paper bag. Tommy looked at the other man older, who Rebecca had not yet been introduced to, and the older man shrugged with the permission of someone senior. "Yeah," Tommy said. "Okay, thanks." Rooster finished his call as they were all heading up the stairs. He fell into step beside Rebecca at the back of the small procession, Leo leading Tommy behind him, the older officer named Gary, who turned out to be exactly as taciturn as he looked and twice as observant, and said quietly, "Denny's been located." She kept walking. "And he won't be a problem," Rooster said. She waited for more. More didn't come. She accepted that. "The sheriff's department said Talia is cooperating," she said. "I know," Rooster said. "I had a conversation with someone who knows Briggs. We're aligned on what information is useful to share and what information stays internal." She looked at him sideways. That's a sentence with a lot of architecture in it. Something crossed his face that was close enough to amusement that she counted it. "Yes," he said, "it is." Inside, she made grilled cheese. 4 sandwiches. She made one for herself, too, because she realized standing at the stove that she had not eaten anything since a handful of crackers sometime around 1 in the morning, and her body had filed a formal complaint that she'd been ignoring. Leo sat at the kitchen table and told Tommy about his dinosaur blanket with the focused intensity of a child who has identified an audience and intends to use it. Tommy listened with an expression of genuine engagement that upgraded Rebecca's opinion of him considerably. Gary stood near the window, not watching the street, or not only watching the street, also watching the room the way it organized itself, who stood where. Rooster sat at the kitchen table across from Leo. She served the sandwiches. She poured juice for Leo and coffee for the adults because she always had coffee, and at this point it felt like the one stable axis the morning was rotating around. For a few minutes, nobody talked about anything important. Leo talked about dinosaurs. Tommy, it turned out, knew a surprising amount about the Cretaceous period, which elevated him further in Leo's estimation to approximately hero status. Gary ate his sandwich and watched the window. Rooster ate his sandwich and watched Leo. Rebecca watched all of them and felt something she couldn't immediately name, a quality of the room, the way it held these mismatched people at her kitchen table, the grilled cheese and the coffee and the morning light, and the surreality of it, this collection of lives that had no business intersecting, sitting in her small kitchen in Building B of the Sunridge apartment complex as though it were the most ordinary thing. It was not ordinary. It was the strangest morning of her adult life. It was also, she realized slowly, the first time in longer than she could measure, that her kitchen had felt full. She sat down with her own sandwich. She ate. She let herself eat without standing over the stove or monitoring something or calculating the next task. She just sat and ate, and the ibuprofen had taken some of the edge off the arm, and Leo was laughing at something Tommy said, and for 4 minutes she counted afterward because she wanted to know how long it lasted. Everything was simply fine. Then Rooster looked at her across the table. "I need to talk to you," he said, "when you have a minute." The quality of those 6 words, the specific weight of them, not urgent but loaded, told her that the 4 minutes were over and the real conversation was arriving. "Leo," she said, "why don't you show Tommy your room?" Leo took this commission with enthusiasm. Tommy, to his genuine credit, stood and followed without hesitation and without looking to Rooster for clearance first, which told Rebecca something about his character that she filed away. Gary moved to the living room with a naturalness that made clear he was relocating rather than leaving, still present, still covering the door. She and Rooster were alone at the kitchen table. He folded his hands on the table. She recognized the gesture now. It was how he organized himself before saying something that mattered. "There are 2 things," he said. "The first one I want to handle today, if you'll let me. The second one is bigger, and I want you to hear it all the way through before you respond." "All right," she said. "The lease first," he said. "I spoke to someone in the chapter who handles practical matters, finances. He's going to contact your property management company today. Not in a way that involves pressure or anything you need to worry about legally. A payment, the back rent the current month, and a deposit against the next 24 months. She opened her mouth. He held up one hand. Hear it all, he said. She closed her mouth. It's not a loan, he said. It's not a debt. It's not a transaction. You will not owe the chapter anything, and you will not owe me anything. It comes from a fund we maintain for situations. People who've done something that deserves to be met with something. He paused. What you did at that diner merits this. Every person in my chapter who heard what happened agreed on that unanimously without me asking them to. She stared at him. They voted, informally, he said, this morning, while you were at the sheriff's department. You told them about me. I told them what happened, he said. I didn't editorialize. I didn't have to. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. She thought about the letter in her purse, the small, folded square, and the number in her checking account, and the 56 days she'd been counting down like a sentence. 24 months, she said. 2 years, he confirmed. She stopped. The number was large enough that her brain kept sliding off it, unable to get purchase. 2 years of not counting days. 2 years of not doing the math at 2 in the morning when Leo's treatment machine ran and the silence gave the numbers room to be loud. I don't know how to accept something that size, she said honestly. You accept it the same way you accept anything, he said. You say yes and you keep going. She looked at him. Why does it feel like you've thought about this before? What to say to someone in exactly this position? Something moved across his face, a door opening briefly and then closing. Because I have come, he said. A long time ago, someone did something similar for me. When I had nothing. When I was a different version of what I am now, but the same core problem. He paused. I've spent 20 years looking for the right place to pass it forward. I'm particular about it. It has to be earned. She heard what lived under that, the weight of it, 20 years of carrying something, looking for the right hands to put it in. Okay, she said. Her voice was very quiet. Okay, he said. Yes, she said. I accept. He nodded once, and she saw she was certain. She saw the very slight release of something in his shoulders that had been held for a long time. The second thing he said, she straightened. Leo, he said, his condition. She went still. This was the territory she defended most fiercely, her child's health, her child's needs, the gap between what he required and what she could provide. No one touched this without her feeling every nerve in her body orient toward protection. I've been in contact with a pulmonologist in Los Angeles, Rooster said. Pediatric specialist. He's considered one of the top 3 in the country for pediatric asthma management. She stared at him. His name is Dr. Fenwick. He's reviewed. I had someone describe Leo's case to him generally without identifying information. He believes there's a treatment protocol that Leo may not be on that could significantly reduce the frequency and severity of the episodes. He paused. He has an opening in 3 weeks. Los Angeles, she said. I'll arrange the transport, he said. Rooster. Rebecca. He said her name the way he always said it when he needed her to stop deflecting and receive something. Your son has been struggling to breathe since before you started working graveyard shifts. You have been watching him struggle and doing everything in your power, and it hasn't been enough because the right resources haven't been available. That is not a character flaw. That is a resource problem, and I am sitting here with resources. She felt the sting behind her eyes again. Harder this time. She pressed her lips together. Dr. Fenwick doesn't take payment from charitable situations, Rooster said. He takes payment from a foundation, a legitimate one, 501c3, registered in California. It operates independently of the chapter, and my name isn't on anything connected to it, which means Leo's care has no association with anything that could complicate your life. She stared at him. You have a foundation. Someone in the chapter does, he said. A member who made money legitimately and decided to do something with it. He's been waiting for the right cases. How long has this been in place? She said. 4 years, Rooster said. 4 years. She thought about 4 years ago, Leo was 2. The diagnosis was new. She had just started at the diner. She had just begun the grinding calculation that had become the framework of her existence. If the geometry of her life had been even slightly different, If she had been somewhere else, if something else had brought her into contact with this world. She stopped herself. That was a road that went nowhere useful. Why me, she said. You have the foundation. You have the capacity. You must encounter people in difficult situations regularly. We do, he said. So why? Because you walked out of that diner, he said, simply, flatly, with no reason to, with everything to lose, with your son 30 feet away and two men between you and what you were protecting. He leaned forward slightly. Do you understand how rare that is? Not the bravery is more common than people think. The instinct, the refusal to watch something wrong happen when you have any capacity at all to stop it. He paused. That is the rarest thing I have encountered in 44 years, and I have been looking for it. The kitchen was very quiet. From down the hall, she could hear Leo's voice, the animated pitch of a child deep in explanation, and Tommy's responses patient interested. She thought about who she had been at 2:14 a.m. the previous night. Tired, frightened in the chronic low-grade way of a person who had been frightened for so long, it had become indistinguishable from ordinary feeling. Running on empty and running on coffee and running on the pure necessity of keeping Leo alive and fed and breathing. She had not felt like a person doing anything rare. She had felt like a person out of options making the only move available. I didn't feel brave, she said. I know, he said, that's the tell. She looked at him. People who feel brave, he said, are performing something. People who don't notice they're being brave, they're just being what they are. He held her gaze. You are what you are, Rebecca. That's not nothing. That's everything. She put both hands flat on the table. She breathed, in and out. She thought about the letter in her purse. She thought about Leo in the doctor's chair in the Los Angeles office in 3 weeks, the specialist. The right protocol, the possibility of fewer nights with the machine, and more nights where her son just slept. She had fought for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have something to fight toward, rather than just against. Tell me about the foundation, she said. Everything. I want to understand it completely before anything is signed or arranged. He nodded. That's reasonable. And I want to talk to Dr. Fenwick directly before Leo's appointment is confirmed. I have questions, medical questions that I've been carrying for 2 years that nobody has had time to answer. I'll set that up, he said, today if possible. And the lease, she stopped, started again. I want the arrangement to be clean. Whatever documentation exists, I want to see it. Not because I don't trust you, because Leo needs me to be someone who sees everything clearly, and I can't do that if I accept things without understanding them. Something in his expression opened like a window. Good, Wayne, he said. That's good. Don't ever stop doing that. Doing what? Requiring clarity, he said, from me or anyone else. He paused. Most people, when someone offers them help, they accept it too fast because they're desperate, or they reject it too fast because they're proud. You're doing neither. You're asking to understand it. That matters. She looked at him across her kitchen table. This man she had known for less than 12 hours, this enormous, scarred, complicated person who had come into her parking lot and her life with the sound of thunder and stayed through the night in a chair that was too small for him and arranged quietly and with extraordinary precision for the architecture of her survival to be rebuilt. You're not what I expected, she said. When you walked through that door last night, no, he said, people usually aren't. What did you expect, she said. When you came into Sam's, he thought about it. He gave the question the respect of actual consideration rather than a quick answer. Coffee, he said. Somewhere to sit for an hour. The highway back to Fresno. He paused. I didn't expect to encounter someone worth staying for. The words landed simply without flourish, and that was what made them land hard. She held them for a moment. I need to call my landlord, she said, because the practical world had a pull that sentiment couldn't entirely override, and she was at her core a practical person. Use the kitchen, he said. I'll check on Tommy and Leo. She almost smiled at that. Rooster checking on Tommy and Leo. The chapter officer doing welfare rounds on a 6-year-old and a 22-year-old in a room full of toy dinosaurs. She picked up her phone. She found the number for Kern Valley Property Management. She dialed. The woman who answered was named Karen and had the harried efficiency of a person managing more calls than she had time for. This is Rebecca Lawson, Unit 14, Building B, Sunridge, Rebecca said. I'm calling regarding my account status. One moment. Clicking, a pause. Ms. Lawson, yes. Your account shows. I'm aware of what it shows, Rebecca said. I'm calling to let you know that the balance will be brought current by close of business today. Both back months, the current month, and an advance payment. You should be receiving confirmation from the account holder within the hour. Silence. I'll need to verify. Of course, Rebecca said. Verify everything. I'll wait. She waited. From down the hall, she heard Leo laugh, a full, unguarded, completely operational laugh. The kind that meant his lungs were having a good moment, the kind she stored up, the way people stored up water in a drought. Karen came back. Miss Lawson, I'm showing a payment has just processed. The woman sounded mildly bewildered the way people sounded when something resolved faster than the bureaucracy was prepared for. The balance is the account is current, and there's a prepayment notation for 24 months, Rebecca said. Yes, Karen said. Yes, your account is clear. Thank you, Karen, Rebecca said. She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table with the phone in her hand and the call over and the number in her checking account suddenly for the first time in 2 years, not the most important number in her life. She did not cry. She had decided earlier that she would not cry, and she was honoring that decision, though it required some active management. She went down the hall. Rooster was in the doorway of Leo's room, his large frame taking up most of the door frame, watching Tommy and Leo on the floor with a collection of plastic dinosaurs arranged in what appeared to be an elaborate territorial dispute. The Triceratops can't be in the same zone as the T-Rex, Leo was explaining. They're enemies. What about the Brachiosaurus? Tommy asked. Neutral, Leo said, like Switzerland. Rooster looked at Rebecca when she appeared beside him. She looked back. It's done, she said quietly. He nodded, no more than that. He didn't need to make more of it than it was, and she was grateful for that too, for the way he understood that the moment belonged to her and didn't require his commentary to be real. Dr. Fenwick can do a call at 4 o'clock, he said, equally quiet. I told his office you'd have questions and to give you as long as you need. 4 o'clock, she said. Yes. I'll be ready, she said. They stood in the doorway of her son's room. Two people who had met in a diner at 2 a.m. and had arrived here at a room with dinosaurs in morning light by the strangest and most direct route available. There's one more thing, he said. She looked at him. Denny, he said, the man who sent those two last night, he reached out to me this morning. Through an intermediary. He paused. He wanted me to know that you were identified, that whoever he would send next would know your apartment building. She felt it move through her, cold and fast, the way fear moved when it was specific and earned. That was this morning, she said, before or after your chapter located him. Before, Rooster said. He made the contact and then we found him. And now he won't be sending anyone, Rooster said, to anywhere. She absorbed that. She did not ask for elaboration. She had told him in the parking lot of the sheriff's department to do what he needed to do, and she had meant it. And the meaning held even now when the consequence of it was standing in her hallway in the form of a sentence she would not ask him to complete. Leo and I are safe, she said. Not a question. Yes, he said, absolute, without qualification. She nodded. She looked at her son on the floor with his dinosaurs and his new temporary friend, the neutral Brachiosaurus standing between the warring parties, Switzerland unbothered by the chaos around it. He's going to want to know what happened to Tommy and the other one when they leave, she said. He gets attached to people. Gary has a dog, Rooster said, a rescued greyhound named Captain. Leo can come meet him sometime. She turned to look at him. How do you know Gary has a dog? I know everything about my people, he said. She thought about that, about what it meant to be known that way thoroughly without gaps accounted for. She thought about Leo, who would be 7 in 3 months and who knew the Latin names of 14 dinosaur species and who said things like neutral, like Switzerland, with absolute authority. And she thought about the appointment in Los Angeles in 3 weeks and the specialist, in the protocol, in the possibility of a future where her son's breathing was not the central organizing anxiety of every day she lived. When do you go back to Fresno? She asked. Tomorrow morning, he said. She nodded. Will I hear from you? He looked at her steadily. Yes, he said, if that's all right. It's all right, she said. From the floor of the room, without looking up from the dinosaur arrangement, Leo said, you can come back for dinner sometime. Mom makes really good spaghetti. Rooster looked at her. She looked at Rooster. He eavesdrops, she said. I'm not eavesdropping, Leo said. I'm listening. There's a difference. This time she did laugh. It came out clean and full and real, and it surprised her enough that she didn't manage to stop it, and Rooster watched it happen with an expression that was the closest thing to open she had seen on his face, like a window that had been painted shut for years finding its latch. Spaghetti, he said. All right. Next Sunday, Leo said. That's when we usually have it. Rebecca looked at her son. At the matter-of-fact way he had just extended an invitation to a man he'd met 14 hours ago, with the radical trust of a child who had not yet learned to be defended against the world, or who had decided with the instinct that sometimes knew better than reason that this particular person did not require defense. She thought about what Rooster had said at the kitchen table, that she was what she was, that it was everything. She looked at Leo, who was what he was, uncomplicated and enormous-hearted, and breathing steadily in the good morning air. She looked at Rooster, who was looking at them both with the expression of a man who had driven to a diner for coffee and found something he hadn't known he was looking for. Next Sunday, she said, 6 o'clock. Don't be late. He stood in her hallway, and the certainty in his face was as clear as anything she had ever read. I won't be, he said. He was not late. Sunday arrived the way late autumn Sundays arrived in Bakersfield, dry and clear, and with a quality of light that made ordinary things look considered like someone had arranged them. Rebecca had been cooking since 4. Not because the spaghetti required 2 hours, it didn't. She could make it in 45 minutes with her eyes closed, but because cooking was the thing she did when she needed to feel like she had control over the outcome of something, and she needed that today more than she was entirely comfortable admitting. Leo had reminded her 3 times since Thursday that Rooster was coming for dinner. Not anxiously, with the specific, focused anticipation of a child who has decided something is important and is monitoring it accordingly. He had cleaned his room without being asked, which in 6 years had happened exactly twice before, both times under circumstances of significant personal motivation. She had noticed. She had not commented. She was learning slowly that some things were better honored by witnessing than by naming. The knock came at 6 o'clock exactly. Not the bell, the knock. 2 knocks measured with the same economy he brought to everything. Leo was off the couch before she turned from the stove. I'll get it, he announced with the authority of someone who had been designated for this role in his own mind several days ago. Check first, she called. I know, Mom. She heard him check. She heard the door open. She heard Leo say with enormous satisfaction, You came. And Rooster, I said I would. Mom said you would too, Leo said. I wasn't worried. She heard the sound of boots on her floor, the door closing. She set down the wooden spoon and wiped her hands on the dish towel and turned around. He was standing at the entrance to the kitchen. He was not wearing the vest. This was the first time she had seen him without it, and the absence of it changed something subtle about him. Not smaller, not less, just more singular. Just David Henderson in a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up and his hands at his sides, and his pale green eyes finding her across the kitchen with a directness that she had stopped trying to deflect. He was holding something, a paper bag held carefully. I didn't know what you brought to dinner, he said. So I brought both. He set the bag on the counter. She looked inside. A bottle of wine read a label she didn't recognize, but that had the quiet confidence of something chosen by someone who knew. And a juice box, the kind with the dinosaur on the label. She looked up at him. Leo mentioned dinosaurs, he said. She stood in her kitchen, holding a juice box with a brontosaurus on it, and she felt something shift inside her that had been braced for so long the shift almost hurt. Not pain, the thing that happened to a muscle that had been clenched for months when it finally carefully began to release. Sit down, she said. Dinner's in 10 minutes. He sat. Leo climbed into the chair beside him immediately, as though the arrangement had been predetermined and launched without introduction into a detailed accounting of the week. The kid at school who had said something incorrect about velociraptors. The nebulizer treatment that had only taken 8 minutes instead of 12 because his lungs were, in Leo's assessment, working better this week. The dinosaur book he'd found at the school library that had a chapter on animals that were technically not dinosaurs, but that everyone thought were. Rooster listened to all of it. He did not perform listening. He actually listened, his eyes on Leo, following the thread of each story with the full attention of a person who had decided that what was being said mattered. He asked questions. Real ones, not the deflecting questions adults ask children to seem engage actual questions that required Leo to think before answering. Rebecca watched them from the stove and felt the evening settle into a shape she hadn't planned for and couldn't have engineered. She served dinner. She had made enough for 4 people because she always made too much, and because some part of her that operated below conscious decision-making had been hoping possibly that the evening would be the kind that lingered. They ate. The spaghetti was good. It was always good. One of the things she knew without false modesty that she did well, and Rooster ate it with the appetite of a man who had been on the road and who did not pretend out of politeness that the food was merely adequate when it was considerably better than that. "This is excellent," he said. "You sound surprised," she said. "I'm not surprised," he said. "I'm just being specific," Leo said with his mouth slightly fuller than ideal. "She makes it every Sunday. I asked her once why always Sunday, and she said because Sunday needs help." Rooster looked at her. She shrugged. "Sundays can be hard," she said. "Good food helps." "Yeah," he said. "It does." They were finishing when he said, "I spoke to Dr. Fenwick on Friday." She looked up. "You did? He said he'd call me Monday." "He will," Rooster said. "I spoke to him separately about the protocol. I wanted to understand it myself before the call." He paused. "What to manage what he tells you, just to be informed, so I could be useful if you had questions I could help with." She looked at him. "What did he tell you?" "That the current treatment Leo's on is appropriate for a general presentation of his severity," Rooster said carefully, using the clinical language, with the precision of a man who had listened hard and retained exactly what was said. "But that there's a biologic medication, a monoclonal antibody he called it, that's showing significant results in pediatric patients with Leo's specific triggers. It's administered monthly. It's not cheap without the right coverage." "The foundation," she said, "covers it completely," he said. "Fenwick's already submitted the intake paperwork." She set her fork down. She looked at Leo, who had stopped eating and was watching her with those dark eyes that missed nothing, reading her expression the way he always did, calibrating. "Are they going to make me better?" Leo asked. She looked at Rooster. He looked back at her, giving her the answer, letting her be the one to deliver it. "They're going to try really hard," she said to Leo, "and we're going to go to Los Angeles and meet a doctor who is very good at this specific thing. And we're going to see. Will it hurt?" "An injection once a month," she said, "like a flu shot." Leo thought about this with the thoroughness he brought to medical assessments. He had in his 6 years become a person with an informed perspective on medical discomfort. "Okay," he said, "I can do that." "I know you can," she said. She looked at Rooster again. The word "thank you" was completely inadequate, and she didn't insult either of them by using it. He seemed to understand that. He picked up his fork and went back to dinner. They were clearing the table when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Deirdre. "Excuse me," she said and answered. "Hey, honey?" Deirdre's voice had the particular tension of someone managing news they weren't sure how to deliver. "I'm sorry to call on a Sunday night." "What is it?" "Sam called me today," Deirdre said. "Sam personally, first time in Lord knows how long." Rebecca went still. "What did he say?" "He's selling the diner," Deirdre said. "He's had an offer from a chain, one of those 24-hour breakfast places. They want the location. They're going to gut it and rebuild." A pause. "He's giving us 60 days notice. He said he'd write references." The kitchen was very quiet. Rooster was at the sink with his back to her rinsing plates, and she could tell by the set of his shoulders that he had heard. He didn't turn around. "When did he get the offer?" she said. "He didn't say." "Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I know that job is—" "I know," she said. "Deirdre, thank you for telling me." She hung up. She stood in her kitchen with the phone in her hand. Leo had retreated to the living room after dinner with his juice box and his library book. The comfortable withdrawal of a child who sensed adult conversation in progress and had learned when to give it space. Rooster turned from the sink, dried his hands on the dish towel, looked at her. "Sam's selling," she said. "I heard," he said. 60 days. She almost laughed at the number. 60 days. The same number as the lease notice, the same number that had been the architecture of her dread for weeks, and here it was again in a different form. As if the universe had a limited vocabulary for warning. "Okay." She said more to herself than to him. Her brain was already moving, already sorting the variables. She was 36 shifts from the end of the month. She had the lease handled. She had some money saved, not much, but more than she'd had last week. She could get about. She was good at her job. She was fast and accurate, and she remembered orders, and she did not crack under pressure, which was a quality that any employer running a diner on any stretch of California highway would find valuable. There are options, Rooster said. I know there are, she said. I'm already making the list. He looked at her with that expression, the one she'd started to be able to read, the one that was something warmer than respect and something more careful than affection, held at exactly the distance that two people held things when they were new to the territory and unwilling to move faster than the ground would support. There's something I want to say, he said, and I want you to hear it without deciding immediately. She crossed her arms, not defensively, steadying. There's a diner, he said, in Fresno, about 4 miles from where I live. The owner is retiring. He's been looking for someone to take it over, not buy it outright, a managed arrangement. Someone to run it. Profit sharing with an option to own after 3 years. He paused. I heard about it 6 months ago and I filed it away. I don't know why, until last week when I found myself thinking about it every morning. She stared at him. It's 40 minutes from the pediatric hospital in Fresno, where Fenwick has privileges, he said. Good school district, quieter than Bakersfield. He paused. I'm not asking you to move for me. I want to be clear about that. I'm telling you that the opportunity exists and that I would personally vouch for you to the owner, and that the logistics of the transition, the move, the gap between jobs, whatever Leo needs, none of that is a barrier. She was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that had weight in it. You've been thinking about this since last week, she said. Since Wednesday, he said, specifically. You thought about it before you knew Sam was selling. Yes. Why? He looked at her steadily. Because I wanted you closer, he said. Not because I'm owed that. Not because last Sunday happened, and I think that creates any claim. But because I met someone worth knowing, and the distance between Bakersfield and Fresno is not large, but it's large enough to make ordinary things difficult, and I am not interested in things being difficult when they don't have to be. She uncrossed her arms. She thought about Fresno. She'd driven that road so many times, Leo's specialist, the highway, that connected her life to the places it needed to reach. She thought about a diner 4 miles from where Rooster lived. She thought about what it meant to run a place rather than work one, to own something in 3 years that was actually hers. She thought about what she'd said to Leo last Sunday when he'd asked why she always made spaghetti on Sundays. Because Sunday needs help. What's the owner like? She said. Something shifted in Rooster's face. The relief of someone who had asked a hard question and received a harder, better one in response. His name is Pete Garza, he said. He's 68. He built the place from nothing over 30 years. He's got a daughter in Seattle and he wants to retire and go see his grandchildren without worrying about the place falling apart in the wrong hands. He paused. He's particular. He'll want to meet you. He'll have his own questions. Good, she said. So will I. I know, he said. And the way he said it, I know, without surprise, without hesitation, told her that this was exactly what he'd expected and exactly what he'd wanted. She looked at the doorway to the living room where Leo was cross-legged on the floor with his book, the moon of his reading lamp, making a small circle of gold around him. She thought about 40 minutes from the pediatric hospital. She thought about Dr. Fenwick's protocol and the monthly injection and the possibility, not a guarantee, but a real medical evidence-based possibility of fewer nights with the machine, of Leo sleeping the way children were supposed to sleep, completely without his chest working against him. She had spent 2 years fighting the same ground, the same numbers, the same diner, the same stretch of highway, the same tightening circle of what was possible. She had told herself she was being responsible. That stability meant staying in place. That survival meant not moving. But survival, she was beginning to understand, was not the same as living. When can I meet Pete Garza? She said. The look on Rooster's face in that moment was not triumphant. It was something quieter and more significant than triumph. It was the expression of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just been told gently and without ceremony that he could set it down. I'll call him tomorrow morning, he said. From the living room, without looking up from his book, Leo said, Are we moving? Rebecca walked to the doorway and looked at her son. Maybe, she said. How would you feel about that? Leo considered it with full seriousness, the way he considered everything. Would we have a bigger apartment? Possibly. Would there be a yard? She looked at Rooster. He said, Pete's place has an apartment above it. It has a yard. Leo absorbed this. Would I still go to school? A different school, she said. A new one. Would I know anyone? She thought about Tommy and his knowledge of the Cretaceous period. She thought about Gary's rescued greyhound named Captain. She thought about a chapter of people who had circled her building in the dark without being asked twice. You'd know some people, she said. You'd meet more. Leo looked at his book, then at her, then past her at Rooster in the kitchen doorway. Does Captain like kids when he asked? Rooster said, Gary says he follows kids around the yard, won't leave them alone. Leo thought about this for 3 full seconds. Okay, he said, and went back to his book. Rebecca turned back to the kitchen. Rooster was watching her with those pale green eyes, and the expression she now knew was his version of joy contained careful real in the way that things were real when they'd been earned rather than given. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. She picked up her wine glass from the table. He picked up his. They did not make a toast because neither of them was the kind of person who narrated moments that could simply be lived. They drank. The wine was good. Of course it was. 3 weeks later, she sat across from Dr. Fenwick in a consultation room in Fresno, not Los Angeles, it turned out, because Fenwick had opened a satellite clinic, which Rooster had somehow known about before she did, and had quietly arranged and listened to the doctor explain the protocol in terms that were clear and direct and human, the way she had always needed medical information delivered and had rarely received it. The biologic should reduce his exacerbation frequency by 60 to 80% in patients with his profile, Fenwick said. I want to be careful not to promise outcomes, but the data is strong, and Leo's case is well suited. How soon, she said. We start the first injection today if you're ready, he said. The initial response is usually visible within 4 to 6 weeks. Leo was in the chair beside her in the disposable paper gown that he had spent 3 minutes inspecting and declared crinkly, but okay. He had his library book on his lap. He looked up when Fenwick said today. Now, he said. If you want, Fenwick said. Leo looked at Rebecca. She looked at him. She thought about 2 years of 2 a.m. machine hum and the careful architecture of survival, and the night she'd walked out of a diner with a tire iron because she couldn't watch one more thing be taken from someone who couldn't afford to lose it. You want to do this, baby, she said. It's just like a flu shot, he said. Just like a flu shot, Fenwick confirmed. Leo thought about it. 1 second, 2. Let's do it, he said. She held his hand. He looked at the wall while the injection was given, and his jaw tightened once briefly and then released. That was all. Done, Fenwick said. Leo looked at his arm, then at Rebecca. That was it. That was it, she said. Huh, he said, and went back to his book. She sat in that room and held her son's hand and felt something she had not let herself feel in 2 years, because it was too dangerous, because hope was expensive, and she had been running a very tight budget on everything, including that. She felt it anyway. She was done rationing it. 6 weeks later, Rebecca signed the management agreement for Garza's Diner on Blackstone Avenue in Fresno, California. Pete Garza handed her the pen himself across the same table where he'd had his morning coffee for 30 years, and his eyes were wet in the way of a man who was not going to acknowledge that his eyes were wet, and she respected him enormously for it. You'll take care of her, he said. Not a question. I'll take care of her, she said. He nodded. He shook her hand. He left to call his daughter in Seattle. She stood alone in the diner for a moment. Her diner for the first time in her life, something that was actually hers, and she put both hands flat on the counter, the way she always had when she needed to feel what was under her solid and present and real. The counter was warm from the morning sun through the front windows. She pressed her palms against it and breathed. The day she reopened, she'd taken 3 weeks to repaint the interior, update the menu, and replace 2 pieces of equipment that had been limping along on stubbornness, and Prayer Rooster was there, not conspicuously. He sat at the counter, same as he had at Sam's same stool position, same angle, so his back was not quite to the door. He ordered coffee black. He ordered the chili, which she had put on the menu, because he'd eaten it the first night and finished the bowl, and she had remembered. He did not make a speech. He did not make it a moment. He sat at her counter and drank her coffee and ate her chili and watched her work. At 9 a.m, Maya came in. She had been driven by her grandmother, who sat in the car outside with a novel granting the visit without requiring it. Maya was 11 and she had Rooster's eyes, that specific gray-green, and her mother's posture straight and deliberate. And she walked into the diner with the self-possession of a person who had learned early that the world required you to walk into rooms and you might as well do it on your own terms. She sat on the stool beside her father. She looked at Rebecca. Dad said you hit someone with a tire iron, she said. Maya, Rooster said. That's what you said, Maya said reasonably. Rebecca looked at Maya. I did, she said. Maya nodded, processing this. Was it heavy? Very. Were you scared? Yes. But you did it anyway. Yes. Maya considered this with the thoroughness of an 11-year-old working through something that mattered. Then she said, Dad said that's what courage actually is, not the absence of fear, doing it scared. He's right, Rebecca said. Maya looked at the menu. Can I have hot chocolate? I'll make it from scratch, Rebecca said. Takes 5 minutes. That's okay, Maya said. I'm not in a hurry. She made the hot chocolate. She set it in front of Maya. She went back to working the counter, taking orders, refilling coffees, running her diner on a bright Tuesday morning in Fresno, with the sun doing something generous through the front windows and the sound of conversation filling the room. At 11, Leo came in with Tommy. Tommy had become in the past 6 weeks a fixture of their lives in the way that certain people became fixtures not through formal appointment, but through consistent presence and genuine interest. Leo had appointed him the official dinosaur consultant of the Lawson household, a title Tommy held with more pride than he would have admitted. Leo went directly to Maya, whom he had met twice before and already treated as an established friend because Leo did not recognize the concept of a provisional friendship. You were his friend or you weren't, and his assessment was usually made within the first 3 minutes. Did you bring the book? Leo asked. I brought the book, Maya said. She produced it from her bag, a field guide to prehistoric marine reptiles, which they had apparently agreed to discuss at this meeting because both of them took these things seriously. Tommy sat down at the counter and ordered coffee and looked at Rebecca with the expression of a man who was moderately bewildered by how his life had arrived at this particular Tuesday morning and completely at peace with it. How's the first week, he said. Good, she said. Really good. Nervous, terrified, she said. But that's okay. He smiled. She refilled his coffee. Rooster caught her eye from the end of the counter. She walked down to him. He had finished his chili and his coffee, and there was nothing in front of him but the empty cup and the space between them, which had become over 6 weeks a comfortable distance, close enough to matter, open enough to move in. Well, he said. She looked around this diner, at Leo and Maya with their book deep in an argument about whether ichthyosaurs qualified as honorary dinosaurs. At Tommy adding sugar to his third coffee with the serious attention he gave to small tasks. At the couple in the corner booth who had come in at 8 and shown no signs of leaving, which meant they liked being there, which meant she was doing something right. At the counter, under her hands warm real hers. Well, she said. He nodded. She thought about Sam's all-night diner, the cracked vinyl and the flickering neon, and the tire iron under the counter, and the night she had stood in a doorway and made a decision that her brain had not fully approved, but her whole self had understood. She thought about the parking lot and the flannel tourniquet and the pale green eyes and the orange-red light. She thought about 30 bikes circling her building in the dark and the sound of them fading and then stopping staying. She thought about Leo's first month post-injection, the 4-week mark when Fenwick had called, with the early numbers, his voice carrying the particular controlled satisfaction of a doctor whose treatment was doing what he believed it would do. 60% reduction in nighttime episodes. The machine's still there, still on standby, but needed less. Leo sleeping through. She had stood in her new kitchen in Fresno and held the phone with both hands and allowed herself finally completely without reservation to cry. Alone in her kitchen the way she did most of the true things in her life, ugly heaving, the kind of crying that has been banked and compressed for so long that when it comes it takes everything with it. Fear and exhaustion and the 2 years of arithmetic in the tire iron and the parking lot and all of it. She had let it come. She had let it go. Then she had washed her face and made dinner. Now she stood behind her counter in her diner on a Tuesday morning and looked at the man who had driven a Harley into her parking lot on the worst night of her recent life and stayed. More coffee, she said. He pushed his cup forward. She poured. It was, she understood, standing there with the coffee pot in her hand and her son laughing over a dinosaur book, and her life arranged finally in a shape she had built rather than endured exactly enough. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue, not the story of a woman who needed saving and was saved. The story of a woman who picked up a tire iron in the dark and swung it, who stood her ground when standing her ground was the wrong tactical choice, and the only human one who said yes to help without surrendering the clarity that made her herself, who moved toward a life rather than away from catastrophe, and who discovered in the wreckage of a 2:15 a.m. parking lot in the flannel of a stranger's makeshift bandage, in the sound of 30 engines circling her building, like a promise that courage was not a single act. It was every morning after, and every morning after that. Rebecca Lawson set down the coffee pot, straightened her back, and got to work.